Life can be unpredictable, and sometimes small acts of kindness can lead to extraordinary outcomes. This is the story of a delivery driver, a simple act of compassion, and a mysterious note that changed everything. Imagine being a delivery driver in a bustling city where every day is filled with tight schedules, endless deliveries, and little time to stop and breathe. But in the midst of it all, one unexpected encounter with an elderly woman would lead to something far beyond what he could have ever imagined. It was a typical Friday afternoon for Jake, a delivery driver for a local grocery store. He had been on the job for a few years and knew the routes like the back of his hand. The work was tiring, but it paid the bills, and he had grown used to the routine, driving from house to house, dropping off groceries and moving on to the next delivery. He didn't expect much to change in his day-to-day life. But that day, something did. As Jake was finishing up a delivery in a quiet neighborhood, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry her groceries up the front steps of her small, worn-down house. She was frail, her hands shaking as she tried to lift the heavy bags, and it was clear that she was having a hard time. Without a second thought, Jake hopped out of his truck and rushed over to help. "Let me get those for you," he said, grabbing the bags from her hands with a warm smile. The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. "Oh, thank you so much, young man. These bags are heavier than they look," she said with a chuckle. "No problem at all," Jake replied as he carried the groceries inside her house and placed them on the kitchen counter. As he was about to leave, the woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson, thanked him again, her voice soft but sincere. "It's not often I get help like that. You don't know how much I appreciate it." Jake smiled, shrugged it off, and said it was no big deal. Little did he know that small gesture of kindness would soon turn into something much bigger. A week passed, and Jake's life continued as usual. His days were filled with deliveries, brief exchanges with customers, and long hours on the road. But one afternoon, something strange happened. As he was finishing up his deliveries for the day, he noticed something unusual in the back of his truck. There, tucked between two crates of groceries, was a small envelope. Jake furrowed his brow in confusion. It hadn't been there before, and he had no idea how it got into his truck. Curiosity piqued, he reached for the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, written in neat cursive on a piece of old yellowing paper. The note read, "To the kind delivery driver who helped me last week, I have something important to tell you. It may sound strange, but please trust me and follow the directions in this letter. Go to the address written on the back of this note, and all will be revealed. You've been chosen for something special." Jake's heart raced as he flipped the note over. On the back was an address, scribbled in the same handwriting. He stared at it for a moment, trying to make sense of what he had just read. What could this possibly mean? Who had left the note? And why him? The address wasn't far from his current route, so despite his confusion, Jake decided to check it out. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was something he needed to follow through on. So after finishing his last delivery, he drove to the address on the note. It led him to an old run-down house on the outskirts of the city. The house looked abandoned, with ivy crawling up its sides and chipped paint peeling from the wooden walls. There was no sign of anyone living there, but the door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for him. Jake hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door handle. Was this a mistake? Should he really be here? But the note had been so specific, and something about the whole situation was pulling him in. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was musty, and the house looked as old as it felt from the outside. Dust covered the furniture, and the only light came from the rays of the setting sun streaming through the cracked windows. Jake's footsteps echoed as he walked further into the house, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of what he was supposed to find. In the center of the living room, there was a small table with a single envelope resting on top of it. Jake's heart raced as he approached the table and picked up the envelope. It was addressed to him by name. Opening the envelope, Jake found another note, this one much longer than the first. The note explained everything. "Jake, if you're reading this, then you followed my instructions, and for that I thank you. You see, I'm not just an ordinary old woman. I've lived a long life, one filled with many secrets and challenges. But now my time is coming to an end, and I need someone to carry on a task I've been entrusted with. That's where you come in. I've chosen you because of the kindness you showed me when you didn't have to. Your heart is in the right place, and I believe you're the one who can fulfill this mission." The letter went on to explain that Mrs. Henderson had been part of a group of people who were guardians of something ancient, something powerful. Over the years, the guardians had passed down the knowledge and responsibility of protecting this secret to trusted individuals, and now it was Jake's turn to take on that role. At the bottom of the letter was a set of instructions leading to a hidden location where the secret was being kept. Jake's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what he had just read. This had to be some kind of joke, right? Guardians of an ancient secret? Hidden locations? It all sounded too fantastical to be real. But as he looked around the old house, he realized that there was no one else around. Mrs. Henderson had chosen him, and now he had to decide whether to follow through or walk away. After a moment of deliberation, Jake made his decision. He couldn't just ignore this. There was something deep inside him that told him this was real, that this was meant to happen. The next day, Jake followed the directions Mrs. Henderson had left in the note. They led him to a remote area outside the city, far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. After a long hike through dense woods, he finally arrived at the location, a small hidden cabin nestled in the trees. Inside the cabin, Jake found an old chest covered in dust and secured with a heavy lock. Next to the chest was a key with a note attached to it. "This is it. Your journey begins here." With trembling hands, Jake unlocked the chest and slowly opened it. Inside, he found a collection of ancient books, maps, and artifacts, things that looked like they belonged in a museum. But there was one item that stood out, a small, intricately carved box with strange symbols etched into its surface. Jake picked up the box and examined it closely. It was heavy, and when he shook it gently, he could hear something rattling inside. Carefully, he opened the box, revealing a glowing stone unlike anything he had ever seen. It pulsed with a soft, warm light, and as Jake held it in his hand, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The note had mentioned that this stone held great power and that it was Jake's responsibility to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. It was a heavy burden, but one that Jake knew he couldn't walk away from. From that day on, Jake's life changed in ways he never could have imagined. He was no longer just a delivery driver. He was a guardian of something ancient and powerful, chosen because of a simple act of kindness. Mrs. Henderson's note had led him to a discovery that would shape the rest of his life. And as Jake looked at the glowing stone in his hand, he realized that sometimes the most life-changing moments come when you least expect them.